So it looks like there's going to be a vote on Kavanaugh, I believe, as soon as tomorrow, unless you're watching this video at a later date, in which case he may already be confirmed. But we have this story from Vox that I thought would be really interesting to talk about. It says, Lindsey Graham, Brett Kavanaugh, and the unleashing of white male backlash. Quote, I'm a single white male from South Carolina, and I'm told I should just shut up, but I will not shut up. So this story is presumably about, well, it's about white male backlash, and let's just start reading it before I comment. Friday morning, during a meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee on Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, that's funny language, Lindsey Graham said probably the most honest thing about this hearing that a Republican has said during the entire process. I'm a single white male from Graham is elevating the stakes of the Kavanaugh hearing. No longer is this about Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford or what he may have done to her in suburban Maryland in 1982. It's about beating back the challenge from feminists and people of color demanding a seat at the table. It is about showing that white men in power are not going anywhere, that they will not listen, will not budge, and will not give ground to Me Too or the Black Lives Matter movement. This was always the subtext of the Republican approach to sexual assault allegations. But now Graham has officially made it the text. Voting yes on Kavanaugh is the battle cry of the reactionary men. I don't like the word reactionaries, typically because it is, and I hate to say this, but it is a dog whistle for the far left. It is typically a dog whistle of communists and socialists because the word was coined by them. It comes from the French Revolution, meaning those who reacted to the revolution, at least this is my understanding of it, that they didn't want it to happen, it was their reaction, yada yada, and they were called reactionaries. And so typically when someone speaks in that language, they're basically, this article is for them. It's not for the average person. Although the Democrats are increasingly becoming what this group is advocating for, or speaking to. Now, it's true. I believe we are absolutely going to see the unleashing of a white male backlash. And in time, there will be fewer and fewer white males, white people in general, in this country and around the world. And so thus, it is important to state that there is a fact that as time goes on, as the ideals of a culture that was rooted in, that was dominated by a Eurocentric white derivative, came from Europe and then these things were founded in America, as that starts to wane and people from, we have migrants and we have the expansion of non-white people and the expansion of far left culture, there's going to be a backlash from white men, plain and simple. This is a fact. And this is going to be exacerbated by websites like Vox. It's going to be exacerbated by websites like Huffington Post and by far left rhetoric that's trying to stay relevant. I think one of the things we're seeing in the culture war is nobody wants to be Blockbuster Video. They want to be Netflix. And that means right now everyone sees the writing on the walls. By 2050 or something, white people will be a minority in this country relative to other minorities, something of that nature. I think right now the US is 62% white. Because of this, companies want to make sure that they're woke, because in time, the key demo will not be white people, and thus they'll have to attract new audiences, new customers, and they want to make sure they appear as being friendly to different groups, not just white people. The problem with this is that a company serving a product to any member of the public is not inherently only for white people. A movie that has white characters is not only for white people, okay? And Lindsey Graham saying that he's a single white male from South Carolina and he's told he shouldn't shut up and he won't shut up is not necessarily an act of aggression against other people. It's more of an act of defiance against people who would tell him to be quiet. And what I think is important here is to first recognize white people, they're going to become a minority at some point. That's the fault of, no one's fault but white people. I mean, if the idea is that non-whites are having kids faster and whites aren't, well then it's entirely the fault of white people for not doing such. And personally, it is what it is. I think times change and you gotta get used to it. But I do recognize, so long as websites like Vox are going to dog whistle, are going to insult and deride people simply for being white, it's going to be a really bad backlash. It's one thing if, as time goes on, white people slowly become a minority because they're not reproducing as fast as, say, other demographics or things of that nature. And you'll see a backlash from that. But it's another thing if, on the way down, various outlets and institutions begin discriminating against white people specifically. What that says to me is that there's no, it's not about honor and it's not about equality. It's about an opportunity to strike. I like diversity. Personally, I like change. I've recognized that times change, and you don't want to be an old fogey and sit back and be a reactionary, as they would describe it. But I also don't think that attacking white people and insulting values because they came from a past that was predominantly white is a valuable thing or is going to do anything for us. In fact, I think it's going to be extremely detrimental. There are values that transcend race, okay? These are values of liberty, presumption of innocence, the Bill of Rights. But now, as time goes on, with websites like Vox and its properties and these far-left websites like the Daily Beast, advocating for things like opposing free speech, okay? Opposing due process. They're tying together white people with liberty. And this really terrifies me. As you all know, Tim Pool is part Korean, which means I'm perfectly safe on the side of those who would condemn the white people so long as I agree with them. But I believe in liberty. And that's liberty for everyone, no matter your race, gender, identity, sexuality, national origin, religion. You deserve human rights and liberty, and that includes, dare I say it, white people, okay? Lindsey Graham shouldn't shut up simply because he's white. That is not an argument. And if we are going to be moving in the direction where we're like, let me say it in this way. Too many people are proving that as there are less and less white people, they fully endorse discriminating against people based on their race. This is reactionary. This is regressive. Reactionary is a reference to those who want to return to the status quo ante. The status quo in this country was segregation for the longest time. It was illegal for people of different races to cohabitate, to have children together. Quite literally, my family had to flee various states because it was illegal. Not my mom's family when she was growing up. It was illegal, okay? Straight up illegal. And it was something like, I think in the 60s, where they finally passed a law. It was like a Supreme Court ruling where it's like, look, it doesn't matter what your race is. That's progress. That's liberty, right? I also believe gay marriage is liberty, and I believe trans rights is liberty. But what they're doing is an act of discrimination against people. And it says to me that right now they're saying punching up is fine. They're like, oh, but we're punching up. White people have power. White people are not a monolith. Not all white people were born in the US. Some were born in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union and are poor as shit and struggle. Okay, so you don't want to just attack people based on characteristics that are just immutable. You just see a person, you judge them. And not only that, you should allow people the right to practice their religion and believe what they want so long as they're not harming others. But when I see stories about, not necessarily this article, it's kind of, but stories like, where they insult white people and call them reactionaries and do dog whistling and stuff, it just says to me that in the future there's going to continue to be racism and discrimination. And these people are not against it. They're claiming to be against it now because it serves their interests. So they have this here. It's actually interesting. Donald Trump's 2016 election is now widely understood among social scientists to be a kind of backlash to social progress. I take issue with defining it as social progress. The backlash against a black president gets the bulk of the attention, but there's also good evidence that a sexist backlash to the prospect of a woman president played a major role. These things are possible. I am not one who thinks I have a right to disagree with three political scientists, certainly not. But social progress is a framing, in my opinion, that I feel is not necessarily the right. I don't believe it's entirely fair. I do believe that there are a lot of people who are conservative who don't recognize institutional racism is in fact a thing, and I have educated many a conservative friend about these things, such as the history of Ferguson and the racial covenants that kept certain races out of certain cities. So let me, just for the sake of for understanding, I'll give you a really quick rundown. I did a documentary on this. In St. Louis, a small group of people would form a small township and then pass a law saying no one else can move in. Decades later, you have predominantly white and predominantly black areas. This has created racial segregation. These are bad things, in my opinion. It has also resulted in a concentration of wealth in certain areas. These are also bad things. I understand there's a natural flow to how money moves through markets, but I do believe that we can do more to rectify social inequities. And I don't mean identity politics, and I don't mean advocating for equality of outcome. I simply mean ignore the outcome and the measurements, and let's just make sure that everyone has an opportunity to present their case and to move forward. With that, a lot of people would argue that, oh, but if, say a black person can take the entrance exam to a university, then what's the problem? There's equal opportunity here. But we also take in consideration the distribution of wealth among racial lines historically. And that means that I believe, and I had this great discussion with Coleman Hughes, if you're not familiar, he's a great young writer, and he said, we don't need it to be about race, we can make it about class. We can recognize that there is inequity along racial lines, but solve the problem not by attacking white people, but by saying, let's focus on class division. Because if your argument is that black people are more likely to be impoverished than white people on a per capita basis, obviously there's way more white people because there's way more poor white people because there's way more white people, the argument is plain and simple. We don't need to tell poor white people you're not deserving of resources and a lift up. And we don't need to tell, any other minority the same thing. We can simply say, regardless, we're going to benefit all poor people and work as a nation to bring education and opportunity to those who are impoverished. Because I believe we should. Thus, you can see why I'm someone who likes Bernie Sanders. And I believe Bernie is a pretty honest guy. He's not perfect. But anyway, the general argument is, if you truly believe that black people are disadvantaged, then making a policy on, or not necessarily even a policy, but like programs on helping the poor that would lift up minorities as well as any of the whites who are caught in poverty as well. In which case, we don't have racial animosity. We don't have white people saying this is racist, and we don't have black people saying this is racist. We simply have poor people saying, thank you for helping me. It's tough. Corruption is a big problem, and I hate the idea of welfare abuse. But I do believe there are things we can do to bring education and opportunity to the poorest of our nation. Because remember, we are only as strong as our weakest link. And that means if we can do everything in our power to uplift those of us who are the worst off, we will strengthen our nation. A strong middle class brings wealth to everybody. And that's why I firmly believe in policies to help bring up the poor. People who are wealthy deserve what they worked hard to obtain, in my opinion. But I also believe that those who have a lot should help those who have less. I'm not advocating for an authoritarian money grab. And I'm not saying we should force the wealthy to do anything. I'm simply saying that I believe in my personal morals. It is not a burden on someone who is extremely wealthy to pay a progressive tax to help provide for opportunity to lower income areas, to those who are impoverished. It's kind of like, I'm going to go off on a tangent, so I'm going to end with this one last argument before I go off too much. But when I was younger, my parents used to say that what Oprah did in giving away tons of resources didn't really mean that much, because for one, the companies were typically sponsoring the giveaways. So when all these middle class and poor people were receiving free stuff, it's not like Oprah was really doing anything to give it to them. It was coming from companies. But even when she does make donations, she's a billionaire. Does it mean much for Oprah, who makes billions of dollars, to give $100,000? Or does it mean more if someone who only makes $10,000 a year giving $100? If someone is poor and they give, a high percentage of their income to help you, that's a strain on that person. And if someone is wealthy and they give a massive amount of money, but it is a really small percentage of their income, it's not going to be that big of a detriment. And that's why I could get into a much longer discussion, and maybe I'll make a video about this, about my beliefs on the progressive tax system, why I agree with it. But I want to make sure, I want to live in a society where those who have a lot are willing to help those who do not. I do not want to force people into this world because the ends do not justify the means. The individual has a right to do so, to do with what their, the fruits of their labor and their income as they see fit, within reason, right? I do believe in regulation, and I believe right now our economy, the way our tax system works, it's like a center-right capitalist system. We do have a decent bit of socialism within our government, but we are a capitalist system. Private individuals control what they do. I guess I'm gonna end this article and just make the final point that the only way I think we can come about a peaceful world in which policies that I believe in are in existence and agreed upon is to communicate with people, to educate them, and over time we can have positive change that lifts everybody up, everywhere. And I believe we have private interests and endeavors and charities that do this as well, and we can eventually get to a point where we have a system in place within government that can do so. But I also want to make sure that we can avoid corruption, and that's why it's really important to have a strong moral compass in terms of how corruption will affect, this kind of financing. I hope that in the future, there will be people who are, more conservative today and more wealthy who will agree that perhaps we can do more as a nation to help those that we would consider to be our weakest link, and so we can strengthen our economy and our community, our government, our country, our world even. But back to the point, insulting white people, attacking them just shows that we are only on track to maintain the exact same terrible world we are already living in. It's not so bad, right? There's a lot of problems in the world. The U.S. is it's pretty all right, but there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. I do not agree with insulting people based on their race. If times are going to change, they're going to change, and there's no reason for you to rub it in people's faces, beat them down, and insult them, because that will only result in violent backlash, which could destroy the fabric of our nation. Hopefully in the future, we can strengthen our nation, more so than today. I don't know what the answers are. I do believe there are a lot of people who are scared of this change, absolutely, and that can only be made worse by the far left insulting, attacking, and deriding. Anyway, I've gone on a little bit too long, so stick around. I've got another video which is kind of about the same thing coming up in just a few minutes. Or actually, it's already up.